taking something away from someone is far more painful and disruptive than not giving it to them in the first place, right? And that's why this problem hasn't been solved, and that's why the can's been kicked down the road for so long. If there's bloat, if you are spending a lot of money on people, whether it's direct payments for employment to personnel, or it's payments to vendors who are supplying various divisions or programs or departments with bullshit, once you turn off that faucet, it's like once someone's getting used to having their coffer filled, and all of a sudden, they have to go find the money elsewhere or go find a job elsewhere, that's what pisses the most people off.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We got a special guest today, Matt Bilinsky, or Matthew. I don't know.
Stick with Matt. We dispense with formalities here.
For brevity's sake.
No doubt.
That extra syllable will get you. And you're a Jew, so you people you got to keep your head on a swivel all the time, right?
Particularly these days.
Yeah. What's been going on?
Nothing. Same old. Everything's been going on. Trying to keep your arms around everything that's happening these days. I mean, it's almost. I always like to believe I was pretty good at being able to digest a high amount of activity in the public sphere. But God, the first couple months of the Trump Part 2 has been tough to digest it all.
Yeah, I mean, by design, I think.
Sure, absolutely.
Shock and awe, you might call it. I mean, that's. I hate to use the phrase since it's a neocon platitude from back in the day, but it is
with
accurate.
Your tongue just enough in your cheek, it seems to be relevant to a number of situations, and this is certainly one of them.
Yeah. So what's your favorite thing so far?
Listen, I want to say, obviously it's in front. Nah, I would have to go just the basics of him just getting rid of DEI across the board. And I think, the domino effect that's going to have, where I don't think it's going to wipe it out entirely, but just saying this is something that never should have been there in the first place, that had no business in the public sphere amongst adult individuals and adult organizations, and just getting rid of it.
Yeah.
Just a vestige of the 2010s that, is going to look like doctors having patients bleed out onto plates in a few years.
Yeah. What about your least favorite thing so far?
Just a couple. I didn't love yesterday. I understand that there was a lot of corruption, and that maybe the United States' services were, interests were not served well in the Ukraine, but didn't love him kind of victim blaming in terms of the Ukraine and starting the war. And I do see some sloppiness around DOGE. For instance, switching up the $8 million lineup with the line item with an $8 billion line item, and showing some of the cost savings. Like, guys, your ultimate objective here, the program here is righteous. Let's not screw ourselves over by getting sloppy and make it validate everybody's criticisms that they're trying to fudge the numbers. Yeah, those are two things that kind of stuck in my mind as less than.
You're talking about Trump's speech, or not even speech. I guess he did give a speech, but mostly
it was an answer to a press conference, and then a subsequent post that had a Truth Social post that had a lot of truth to it, but hey, at the end of the day, I'm still of the opinion that those that commit the first act, I'm sure you have thoughts here, those who commit the first act of war, regardless of whether or not there were certain steps taken against them, are the aggressor nations, other than incredibly rare circumstances.
Well, what would the first act of war? You mean the first? So this is not difficult, but it's an interesting conversation because, let's say, from Germany's perspective, the first act in World War II with regard to America was the fact that we were supplying England with ammunition and weapons and shit like that, right?
Would you say that that's historically that a third party supplying an enemy with weapons is necessarily an act of war in the same regard that a blockade would be an act of war?
No, I mean, there's levels, certainly. But if I was at war and somebody was supplying my enemy, I would consider them my enemy. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I would declare war on them. Right?
Yeah, well, that's once again the question. Would a nation be justified or validated in committing an act of violence against the sovereign territory or representatives or military personnel of another country because they're supplying an enemy? And I think that's probably one of those edge cases, right, where you start to make arguments in either direction. And then, with World War II, even the bigger oddity that a lot of people seem to overlook in the conversation is that, hey, the United States was good chance they were just going to focus on Japan until Hitler said, no, I have a treaty, I'm going to honor my treaty with the Japanese and declare war on the country they're at war on, which is the United States. And who knows, there's an alternative history where, maybe it's just the Pacific theater for quite a bit of time.
Yeah, it's, Hitler is, he was a man prone to mistakes. I'll say that. Trying to fight in the, in northern Russia in the middle of the winter seemed like a bad idea.
Brilliant.
A two-front war in general seems like a bad idea, which became basically a six-front war. To be honest, people say America had to get involved to stop Nazism, and I think that's not true, to be honest, because this is in hindsight, obviously. Maybe we didn't know this at the time, but Hitler had spread his army so thin that he was on the way down before we even got involved, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we kind of fucking knocked him out after he had been popped a couple times.
Yeah, when you start thinking about it, and sure, this is a little bit of rose-colored glasses, America rah-rah history, and that we were really the key member of the Allied triumvirate in defeating them militarily. And you're like, oh wait, no, the Russians bled them out of God knows how many 8 to 12 million troops, and you'd have, in terms of the tactical mistake, Hitler's tactical mistakes. Like, okay, wait a second, you have a 1.5 million of the Army Group South, God knows what, encircled, and all your generals that are far more experienced than you telling you, listen, sorry, but I know this I know this violates your principles, but we need to retreat. We have an army that has not been supplied with food or clothing to withstand a Russian winter. Sorry, we need to take a step back here. And he says, no, I think there's some weird spiritual force guiding the Wehrmacht, and you need to hold ground. And compounding a few of those decisions probably meant it was inevitable that the Nazis were going to be defeated. And yeah, we just came in to kick them while they were down. Yeah, that does seem to be the case
to some degree, for sure. And we could have maybe it wouldn't have been the right thing morally to do. But we could have let Europe attrition that away, probably, to be honest. I mean, the Netherlands and Poland were doing a pretty decent job at fighting back.
They were, weren't they?
Yeah. They killed Reinhard Heydrich, who's the architect of the fucking slaughter of Jews, basically the butcher of Prague. And even the French horseback cavalry took down I think it was a company level group of Panzer tanks, right? Think of like Saving Private Ryan with the sticky bombs and shit like that. It was like guerrilla warfare, and they fucked up an entire tank unit on horseback. So we give the French a lot of shit. I don't know where actually this whole the French are pussies thing came from, because they were in revolutions for 300 straight years, basically. Now they dress like a bunch of homos, but
the French military history is an odd one, because they went even on the eve of World War II, they were still considered the best, most well-trained army in the world. And even you read some communications on the German side, they're like, yeah, their tanks were better than the Panzers. I mean, the shock. Or even looking at Stalin saying, Stalin's shock at the French defeat was like, damn it, I thought the French and the Germans were going to bleed each other out for another 4 or 5 years. And it's the oddity of Hitler being able to finish what at best should have been a 3-year victory in 6 weeks, kind of has obscured the vision of World War II, both in terms of the German performance and, prior military history of the French. I mean, even 20, 25 years before that, they performed pretty well. Listen, the Germans have double the population. Yeah.
And 10 years after that, they were in fucking Vietnam. You know what I mean? Yeah. Doing the stupid shit that we would do 20 years after that.
Sure.
But my assessment of that is that the French weren't prepared for total war until they got hit too hard to respond.
Seems to be the case. And also apparently, and like it's still so strange, right? How the hell did the Germans defeat them? I mean, I get it. They penetrated a forest that the Ardennes that no one anticipated they would go through, but it's not like they crossed the Ardennes in an hour and a half. Like the entire French army seeing like, oh wait, the entire German army, the totality, every Panzer division is going through the Ardennes forest right now. Maybe we shift our focus a little down south. It's still strange that is how history played out.
Yeah, it is, and it reminds me. You mentioned something before about would the country's behavior be validated in one way or another when declaring war, or what stage, and who provoked whom, and whatnot. Mr. Miyagi says, "Don't fight, but if do fight, win." Right?
Sure.
Which is broken English. But
nobody did it better than Mr. Miyagi.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think that you have to be constantly prepared for total war. Otherwise, some despot will be, and all it takes is a couple of speeches and a bad economy, to be honest. Like I hate to be reductive, but you can see tribalism rise up even in our own country, which is a pretty good fucking country as far as countries go. You know what I mean? And you can see the alternate as well. What happens when a country gets to not necessarily sure of itself, but sure of its own position over other countries morally, right? When you start, like, I'll be frank here. There's no morality in war. If you get in my way, I'm going to fucking take your head off, because that's what war is. Like, don't play the game if you don't want to play the game. Let's not pretend that there's some kind of, like, the British tried that. They thought that there was some, like, standing in formation was the honorable way to conduct war. No, the honorable way to conduct war is to only fight it when you really need to, and then kill everybody that you have to stop it as soon as possible. Right?
I would agree.
That's the honorable way to do war. And we'll celebrate our dead, and you celebrate yours. There's going to be a winner, and it's going to be me. That's how it fucking goes, right? So I don't buy into that. It's certainly a discussion, but we shouldn't be fighting wars all willy-nilly and such, but we should be prepared for total war at all times. And when I say total war, I mean, I don't give a fuck if you're wearing a uniform or not. You get in my way, you're going to fucking die, right? Like your country has aggressed into mine, or you present some existential threat, and we're going to fucking eliminate that threat. Now, you can get out of the way, or you can get on board.
100%. And that, goes back to the determination of what constitutes an act of war, because at least some version of the consensus morally is that once an act of war is committed, then sure, there are less moral boundaries in responding to that, right? Even those who might not entirely agree with what we say, that yes, a war can be fought in one direction and justified in response to an act of war. And so it feels weird that in this, since we didn't have war for a while, right? I mean, the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century was a relatively peaceful time, and then a couple conflicts sprang up over the last 4 or 5 years, and then obviously that coincided with the golden era of social media chatter and social media idiocy chatter, is that everyone lost sight of what was historically considered to be an act of war or wasn't. And I guess there's a conversation to be had of, are we now redefining what constitutes an act of war, and what is justifiable in responding to one, for the everybody's chit chat and social media age. And it seems like despite the best efforts of people like me and you who try to have some historical perspective on it, everyone wants to try to redefine it now.
Yeah, I mean, so Chuck Liddell calls it a fighting offense, right? Okay. If you commit a fighting offense, it doesn't matter if we're friends or strangers or where we are when we're fighting. Yeah, that's how it is, right? And the point of that is that it is I guess a first principle approach. Consequences matter more than anything else in the world. Consequences matter more than anything else that will ever matter, because without them, we're in postmodernism, right? That. If you look into Jean-Michel Foucault, this whole ideology that sprang up, it's basically just repackaged Marxism. But this idea of consequence-free environments leads to the worst people and the worst forms of government, and the worst economics you can possibly imagine. We know that, right?
And then you look at Foucault and like, hey, some of the reason that he wanted or advocated for a consequences-free environment was because
he was a pedophile.
He was a pederast, and he wanted to go.
Yeah.
He's like, oh wait, society's morality says that I shouldn't go and have sex with this 12-year-old boy. Oh wait, who are you to ever say that? And then he tries to get into all this relativism. It was like, no, there's supposed to be some morality to it, and you trying to dispense with that is just serving your own appetites.
Yeah, it definitely is. And maybe we all do that to some degree. I think we probably do.
Sure. We all
not the pedophile part, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole thing. All of us be self-serving in some direction, not except to go indulge our carnal appetites in that regard with underage people, as Foucault did. You go down to Algeria and go have a ball. It was studies.
6 to 9 year olds, by the way. It was his bag, not even 12. Which I don't know if that makes it worse. It feels like it's worse.
Yeah, no, I feel like they keep on that's inverse. The age thing is there's an inverse in terms of the degree of the violation there, but Foucault and him being possibly, I think, the most cited academic in the past 25 years happens to also be a guy who is a shameless, unapologetic pederast. It makes you kind of scratch your head a little bit.
Yeah, there's a fucking opinion piece. I think it was in it was in one of the major papers. I don't remember if it was the Times or the Post. But it was like, what to make of these new revelations about Foucault? Does that mean what he says isn't true? Like, oh my God, dude. But yeah, my opinion on all of this, when I say total war, I just want to make sure that people understand what that means. It's not deploying 130,000 people to Iraq and policing it. That's not what total war is.
Definitely not.
Total war is I put my fucking boot on your neck until you say uncle, right?
The end of the Pacific War and World War II, I would say, both theaters, but yes, the finality of driving the Japanese towards unconditional surrender, or I guess what it turned out to be, which was unconditional surrender, but I guess they allowed the emperor to remain in some completely only ceremonial position, but other than that, it was unconditional. That is total war. And that's, to a certain extent, and that was a reality that the Americans had to face, that the Japanese had a culture and a belief, and on the War Council, that, they would rather die, that they were going to be driven by kamikaze motives and would rather die than preserve their culture, and that they were going to give an inch. And at some point you say, okay, well, it's either that or I go invade your entire island and lose, a million of our soldiers, or we find another way to inflict so much pain on you that you give up without that happening. And that's an eventual reality. It seems like a lot of war combatants have to face.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if it's funny, because there's a parallel going on right now. Russia-Ukraine is a territorial dispute, right? That's essential. That's what it is, and those happen from time to time. We're not used to it anymore because we're fucking, we sleep inside. We got fucking lattes and shit.
Sure.
You know what I mean? We've got soft pillows. It's like, well, we don't do war anymore. It's like, well, yeah. We do. There's dudes sleeping up in the fucking Urals outside right now in the middle of winter, and they'll do war.
Oh yeah.
So you better be fucking ready to do it. And total war, Europe. When I say Europe, the European culture, British civilization, and how it's spread to include, like, we're the extension of British civilization.
Sure.
And this metaphor, I've said this before, but we are the Western Roman Empire in Constantinople, and the Eastern Roman Empire is now run by barbarians, right? Stupid fucks who don't know, like, they don't embody the civilization in any meaningful way anymore. So all of it is over, and we are British civilization, and we should act as such. Now, Britain was always ready for a fight. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they were ready for a fight to decimate you. As a matter of fact, that's one thing. There's not a whole lot of parallels necessarily between the British and Roman armies. I guess phalanx formations and shit like that when it turned to hand to hand. But decimation is one of them. You know what decimation is? I killed.
Not in that context.
Yeah, like let's say you're in a territory that has been captured by Britain, and we've now put your soldiers to work for us the same way the Romans did, right? And you guys are fucking around and not doing what we say. We kill 10% of your fucking unit. Brutality has a place, is what I'm saying. In my opinion on all this is, and we'll talk about the Gaza bullshit here in a sec, because I think there's good parallels here.
Sure.
My opinion is that if my civilization continues to exist such that they can blame me for the evil shit I did, I have done my job, right? And I'll wear that. I don't give a fuck. Yeah, I peeled that motherfucker's skin off because he wouldn't fucking bow down to what is the fucking law here, and that's me.
And let's be honest, that's how history developed for most of civilization in the last 20, 25 years. We're a real outlier. And people lost sight of that as a reality, that at some point when two peoples are in conflict, it's kill or be killed at some point. And that, yeah, sure, the history's, written by the victors to a certain extent, but a lot of the victors, yes, they committed atrocities, and you're trying to determine on a relative basis whose atrocities were worse, and you're not and if you're going to determine morality at a military conflict based on did either side do something bad, like everybody's going to be the bad guy. You got to judge based on one was capability the limiting principle. Was one side trying to do worse to the other side and they simply weren't able to do it? Was one side acting in response as opposed to the instigator? Those types of things. And these are just like, nobody would have questioned that these were things you had to ask yourself until we just forgot that war happened over about a 20-25 year period.
Yeah, and then we are hopelessly naive about it.
Sure.
The last time, and I'll bring this back to the Muslims, and let's be clear. There's a couple billion of them, and if every Muslim was bad, we would know about it, right?
Sure.
Because we would fucking know. Don't be ridiculous. But I don't care about that. Frankly, that's not my fucking problem. My problem is that the last time we faced an enemy that we're willing to die just to microscopically advance their agenda over a very long period of time, it was the Japanese Empire. And there was only one way to solve that, and it was to fucking nuke them, right? Like, you have to hit them so hard that they'll shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Right? Forever. And we have no tolerance to do that with these Muslims. And when I say these Muslims, I mean radical Islamists and the people who support them, by the way, which is a very large percentage of the Muslim communities overseas. I don't know why people can't admit to that.
This wasn't long ago that it seems like, in acknowledging that we perpetrated the war on terror incorrectly, we have also lost sight of the fact that there is massive segments of a certain population that really despise us and will celebrate any act of violence against us. This is not like the whole notion that when, how many acts of terrorism from the late, 1997, 1998 to about, let's say when Al-Qaeda kind of got shut down in 2017, 2018. I mean, there were incident after incident in the United States and Western Europe of radical Islamic terrorists, targeting civilians, and they didn't see there wasn't really much of an outcry or much of a peep from the vast majority of Arab or Muslim civilization. It was kind of accepted as a reality that these people either, one, don't like us, or two, don't like us to an extent that they're going to find a way to excuse the killing of our civilians. And hey, I know that we all want to live in harmony, like one, big rainbow knit sweater, God knows what, but that's not how it is. And there are some people that there is civilizational hostility. And I don't know, all of a sudden, some people, and also some people on the right recently, are now, insistent on finding this relativism that, wait a second, no, these people don't really hate us, or was Dave Smith, Iran's not the enemy. I'm sorry, the people that kidnapped, took over the American embassy and chant America's the great Satan and burn our flags, they are in fact your enemy. Just because they did not launch a weapon against you because they know in response that will blow them off the map, that doesn't make them less of a threat. The only thing that is limited in them visiting harm upon you is their capability. They don't like you. And so that's just been obscured. I don't understand why people lost sight of this so quickly.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. I mean,
strange.
And here, this is a good thing to think about. Think about how many people in the early 2000s were cheering for bombing Iraqi cities. Iraq did nothing to us.
Yeah.
Maybe one guy in Iraq, Saddam, maybe, we still don't really know, maybe helped Zarqawi get treated for some injuries, right, at some point, but we don't know about that. I mean, that's based on some of the same intelligence as Curveball. Curveball is the guy that told us that there were weapons of mass destruction, and it turns out it was
the yellow cake uranium situation.
Yeah, it turns out it wasn't even a real person, by the way.
God.
Yeah, it was this some British MI6 had invented curveball to justify something else, probably through parallel reconstruction or something like that. And so we saw it. Rumsfeld saw it. It's like, oh, there we go. Let's fucking do this. Yeah. So think about, and in Gulf War I as well, and then in Iraq, think about all the people that were cheering for this stuff. Mm-hmm. And you're cheering for your country, whatever. Yep. Like I'm not hating on anybody. I'm just saying. Now imagine that country. Imagine a country that doesn't have dissent, right? That is far more prone to group thought than ours. You know what I mean? We're talking about usually if you do polling in the Middle East, it's changed a little bit with the internet and the Arab Spring, to be frank. Mm-hmm. But before 2013, before 2012 and 13, with the Arab Springs. If you did polling in the Mideast, you would find somewhere around 70%, right? That would be the standard for any question you ask, 70%. You don't see that anywhere else. Mm-hmm. Even in like Northern European homogenous communities, you don't see that much. Yep. So you're in a country that doesn't have dissent anymore, who feels like they're being invaded, right? Who only have access to the propaganda they're provided. How might they support the groups that are fighting back, at least in their mind, right? So I'm not saying we should nuke all of these countries and all their civilians. We can't do that, right? But you have to hit the fighters so hard that there's no fighters left.
Correct.
There's no other way to handle that situation, and people need to wake the fuck up. We are in a goddamn global war with Islam right now, and not that we created this problem. There's no question about that.
Maybe contributed as opposed to created?
Well, there's a couple of points where I think we are way more to blame than they are. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe they are overreacting to some degree, but the British offering the Ottoman Empire, Palestine, right, to help them win World War, offering Palestine to the so-called Palestinians, which are really Jordanians, right?
Yeah.
They were all Jordanians. But offering them that to help them defeat the Ottoman Empire in World War I. And they were like, yeah, cool. And they did it. And like, all right, cool. There's the British-Palestinian Mandate. Enjoy that. You know what I mean? And to be honest, nobody really fucking raised a lot of hell about that. Most of the global Jewish diaspora at the time weren't necessarily Zionists. They didn't care about that. They lived there and they didn't care, right? Yeah. And then World War II happens, and look, horrible, obviously. But then France and England are like, well, fuck you guys in our agreement from before. Here you go.
Sure,
right? And that was. I'm not saying it was a mistake, but there was a way to do that diplomatically that involved everybody that could have been better. Now, to the Jewish state's credit, they offered the so-called Palestinians, I say so-called because there's never been a fucking place on a map in the history of the world,
correct,
right? Just to be clear. So the Gazans and whomever else, which are really just Jordanian people, they offered them like great deals a couple of times, and it's like, now we're going to war. It's like, well, if you can't last more than 6 days in a war, maybe you should just accept the deal and move on.
That's it.
You know what I mean?
I'm like, that's it. And it stemmed from, this all tracks back to pre-industrial times that were the time of empires, right? And it was, that area was all scrambled because of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
That was scrambled out of the Ottoman Empire in the interwar period between World War I and World War II. And yes, who's to say, it was like, okay, wait a second, you were under the sovereign rule of the Turks and the Ottomans before, and then we have this kind of weird, halfway house, like gray area with the British, and like, all right, well, there was some Jews there, and then some of them also started buying the land, and like, listen, you sold it to them.
It's valuable land.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, you're 70, 80% of the population, but like there's not, there's not a defined, drawn boundary of a nation with like a discrete, identifiable people. And so this was all fucked up, a whole scrambled situation. And so the people that were in charge of it as resultant from World War I said, hey, you guys got to kind of play nice. You two groups of people got to kind of play nice. And one side said, okay, we're so, desperate for a homeland or a safe haven from Europe and World War II that we'll take a compromise deal. And the other side said, well, no, there were more of us here before, and even though we didn't really have our own nation, we won't take a deal. We're going to go to war. Okay, if you lose, sorry, you got to deal with the consequences.
Yeah.
That's
and
it.
To be fair, if they had just participated politically, I'm not sure if like I don't actually know this. The Jews that lived in Palestine before any of this, would they have referred to themselves as Palestinian people? I think
no, not in a million years. There's no
but neither would the Jordanians.
No,
right?
but that's kind of the point. Is that like this was the kind of the global order that unrolled in the first half of the 20th century, resulting from like how World War I and World War II kind of put finality on this, pre-industrial age of empire. It was like there are a lot of aspects of the second half of the 20th century did not reflect what the reality was 100 years before, because it all got worked out in the first half of the 20th century, right? And it didn't always get nice and neat. And you couldn't always necessarily say that, wait a second, this one definable people that in the same way that, that the Chinese had been in their territory since the Ming Dynasty, or God knows what. It wasn't quite as simple in the Middle East. And the Jews are looking back and saying, well, yeah, the only reason there were less of us here is because you booted us out 1,000 years ago. And okay, so there's also holes you can poke in that argument. And the point is, nobody had a really good argument. Everybody had an argument that had holes in it, right? Yeah. So in that circumstance, all right, either you take the deal or you fight. If you don't take the deal and you choose to fight, you got to live with the results.
I mean, this is like a court of law. You take the plea deal or you fucking go to trial.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Which, I agree with that assessment. Nobody had a better claim.
Yeah, if someone had a perfect claim and someone came with a less perfect claim, then okay, the people with the perfect claim win out.
Yeah.
If both sides had a not great claim and one side said like, we'll take this less than perfect deal because we want something, and the other side says, no, this is all ours, we won't take any deal.
Yeah.
All right, then fight the fucking war, and if you lose, you got to fucking deal with it.
And the other option would have been, and I don't know why this wasn't part of this process in any meaningful way, would have been to talk to Iran and Saudi Arabia and Oman and Bahrain and so on and so forth, and say, hey, well, the Israelis or the Jews at the time, I guess it would have been called just Jews, are buying up all this property. Why don't you buy up some of this property? You know what I mean?
No one was stopping them.
Like, why? Who? I don't understand why that never happened. Back to the other part where I think just the totality of the situation, the West is more culpable, in my opinion. And here's another example. Overthrowing Iran's leadership multiple times. We got involved there. We helped Saddam take power in Iraq to fight back against Iran, the monster we created there. And then we had to empower Muqtada al-Sadr's father to fight Saddam, and that's what became Jaish al-Mahdi. And then we had to create fucking ISIS to fight him, right? And then we sent ISIS and al-Qaeda to Syria to fight them. But
well,
it's like
once again, are these some situations where we didn't necessarily create, but we contributed?
We created ISIS. I was there when it happened.
Okay.
So we
expand on that.
Okay, so there was Muqtada al-Sadr's father. He was a religious cleric, but he also had Sadr City, if you're familiar with this. It used to be Saddam City, right?
Okay.
Named as such just to try to displace Sadr's influence, but it never worked.
Sorry, because Sadr, Shiite or Sunni?
Shia. Okay. So 83% of Iraq is Shia. 17%, actually it's more like 15% is Sunni, and they were all Ba'ath Party people. And then there's some Assyrian Christians and some others. But al-Sadr creates Jaish al-Mahdi, the Mahdi army, right? And it is a Shia militia, very large. There's about 4 million people in that city. So all the military-age males, they all fucking fight for him, right? We get there during the surge in 2007, and these guys, Sadr's a smart guy. So they're running these, what's effectively an extortion real estate scam like the mob would run. They send fucking 4 dudes to your house and say, here's 10% of what it's worth, get the fuck out or we'll kill you. All over. So they were trying to make Sadr City bigger, right?
Got it.
So they were encroaching farther and farther to the west. So we set up, we start training these, a lot of them were young dudes, a lot of them were ex-Iraqi army guys. We called them the Sons of Iraq, right? It's really catchy, isn't it? We start training them, and they we build this up from 2007 until about 2010, and they decide to branch out. And that's what became ISIL, the original ISIS, right? It was those guys. So we trained them directly. Not that we were trying to create a militia or anything. All we trained them to do was get into gunfights and set up checkpoints, right, to make sure these guys weren't doing. But this is what happens, right? It's the law of unintended consequences. So step after step in multiple countries, we have made mistake after mistake, thinking that this is the problem with midwits, right? They think they're fucking smart enough to do what they're doing, and nobody that's worked in the fucking national security industry at the top level for the last 60 years has known what the fuck they were doing. Mm-hmm. Everything they've done has been a mistake. Now, some of that might be a function of the fact that we change power every 4 years, right? So you have this mission that takes 12 years to accomplish. Well, good fucking luck, right?
Yeah.
So it just doesn't work that way.
Institutional knowledge not carrying over from one phase to the next.
Yeah, and then the execution of a plan. It's like, well, we don't believe in that anymore, so we're not going to do it because we don't think it's working. Well, it wasn't supposed to work in year 4 or 5. It was supposed to work in year 8, right? So some of it is that, but we've pushed this to the precipice, and all of those mistakes we made, but also in our incompetence, like not understanding exactly what it takes. This Western naivety that led to the capture of the Eastern Roman Empire by the barbarians, right? Like, oh, these people kind of look like us. They'll share our values, or we can export our great culture to them and they'll believe in it. No, they're going to come and terraform your culture. That's what happens always, right? And even when we deploy to the Middle East, there's not, like, what you would consider to be police brutality in America is just how you get somebody's attention over there.
Yeah.
It is a machismo culture based on dominance. And if I need fucking Habibi over here to give me some information, I literally have to slap him in the face in front of other men. It's hard to explain this to Western people, but what it does is show that I'm the alpha, like a fucking pack of dogs, and it gives him permission to tell me stuff.
Yeah.
If I just run up and try to intimidate him and ask him questions and shit, he's going to say no because that's not how their culture works. But hit him in front of other dudes, like deflate him a little bit, and you put him on a level where now he's able to fucking comply with what you're saying. That's literally how it works. And you can play that game or not. We can seal up our borders and never let anybody in again, and I'd be perfectly fine with that. That's one option, right? Or we can fucking demolish these people in a way that they're going to understand it. Mm-hmm. Those are the two options. There's no other options on the table. Yeah. There's no appeasement is feeding the crocodile hoping he eats you last. There's no version of appeasement that works.
Yeah, and that's to your original point, is that even to the extent that we created some of these groups or contributed, or, you know, you can, in terms of tracking the causality, trace it back to something that we did. At the end of the day, now, when they want to kill us, we have to kill them. Right. Yeah. So just like, and
if somebody's standing outside of your fucking house yelling that they're going to kill you, whether it's a border or your physical house, and they're saying they're going to kill you, you should go kill them. Like, it's that simple.
And it's just very strange to me how I understood this on the left, is that this is their, you know, nihilistic, masochistic pacifists, and to a great extent. And now I'm seeing on the right just simply ignoring how many more terrorist attacks on civilians in mainland Europe have to come from, you know, Muslim immigrants to understand that this is still a strain, and these people present the most dire threat to your welfare in the West. And then they're trying to, you know, when they're analyzing this conflict in the Middle East, they're trying to find some sort of relativism between the two sides. I'm like, listen, even putting on my acceptance of, you know, some of the we're giving too many resources to the Israelis, I'm open to the argument, but I'm sorry, there is one side that clearly has your best interest less at heart than the other, okay? There's one group of people that is more likely to go and fucking shoot up a town square in somewhere where or one of your family members might be. This is not a contest here. Just like there's no contest as to which one poses a more grave threat to you, and it's just very odd to me that so many have lost sight of that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. This is the difficult part of the conversation, because I don't want American dollars going to anybody but Americans, frankly. But
fair enough.
It's is that a realistic world to live in? Maybe not. I mean, I don't have a problem with selling. By the way, the U.S. government, people have these strange ideas like about energy, especially, but it applies to the military-industrial complex as well. There's 2 points on the MIC that I can talk about, but just overarching here. when we become net exporters of energy, the government does make money on that. People think that that's just private companies. No, there's tariffs, and there's also fees that they have to pay both for using public land to drill or frack LNG or whatever it is. And then there's also refinement fees and all kinds of other shit that get made. And this is on the exports, right? So that goes to the end user over in Europe or in wherever the fuck else. And this is why I think I've been talking about this recently, but we need to start funneling that shit into a sovereign wealth fund immediately. There's no reason Norway's got a $1.7 trillion sovereign wealth fund, and we've got a Federal Reserve where we don't even know if the gold is there.
Yeah.
Right? It's fucking stupid. Yeah. Now, the same thing with the military-industrial complex side. We send $6 billion worth of weapons to Israel. That's not just like I don't know why that's a big deal. And by the way, it's the same thing that people are kind of championing with Trump trying to recoup some of our Ukrainian costs through rare earth mineral stuff. That's the same general idea. Like, hey, yeah, we'll help you. And by the way, this country that you're living in right now doesn't exist without that same exact help from the Netherlands. They gave us our first $10 billion loan. I think in 1777, maybe something like that. John Adams negotiated that. In addition to help from the French and stuff like that. So I'm a Monroe guy, right? I like the United States should be hegemon over the Americas, and that's it. Yeah. Frankly, right? And Europe should control Europe, and we should empower Japan to whatever degree we can to control Asia. I'm not, and I'm also not against this potential trilateral agreement between us, Russia, and China, right? Like, we are pretty dominant as a group. Yeah. And there's no reason that we shouldn't be worried. Like, this idea, what Trump said about everybody trying to reduce military spending by 50% over the next 4 years, the three of us, the three major companies that are countries that are spending money on it, that seems like a really good idea to me.
Absolutely.
But I don't see any reason to not work with those guys, to be honest. We don't share the same values to some degree. That's true. But so social values, we share pretty much everything with Russia, actually. If you would stop listening to the noise and pay attention to the way they operate over there, if you're a fucking based person, as we like to call ourselves these days, and you look at how Russian culture works, yeah, it's way closer to you than you think. Like almost indistinguishable, frankly. Now, China's a different story, but there are these levers that you can pull to help somebody along, right? So, and we've done it in China. I don't know if you've ever worked in any kind of manufacturing or any of that shit, but
surface, maybe at an arm's length, not fully,
So China had pretty bad worker conditions for a very long time. Let's say forever, right? And then we started saying, well, we'll shop in Cambodia, we'll shop in fucking Laos, we'll shop in Vietnam. South Vietnam is where a lot of our fabric comes from now, actually, instead of China. Now, a lot of it comes from China because they have a free trade agreement between them, and that's fine, right? But China's only option was to upgrade their worker conditions to comply with international law. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to participate in the markets. That's how you do shit, with tariffs or standards to bring that country closer to what you think is right.
You don't just let them fight a one-way trade war.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
That was the best. I'd say first Trump administration, that was probably my favorite. It was like, wait a second, this is finally the first guy who's kind of identified and made a stink about the fact that China's been fighting a one-way trade war against us, and we need to fight it back. And the point you make, and I think is a lot of this, is that a lot of current conditions are holdovers from a prior era, whether it be the Cold War or a era when the Chinese economy was so infantile that it wasn't a threat to us. And it's like really a lot of problems stem from not addressing a problem, not addressing an issue when you're no longer in the circumstances that justify it, right? And so, sure, great. Okay, we can allow if China wants to be in the part of the Western commercial ecosystem. Great, they want to go put 20% tariffs in one direction. We don't put tariffs in the other direction. All right, that works when China's economy is 1/50th the size of the American economy in 1999, or once they experience 20 years of never before seen growth and take all of our manufacturing. Okay, no longer the circumstances we can allow that to fester. with the and in terms of the size of the American military, and that's just a lot of people were criticizing Trump. Oh, you're cutting all this U.S. aid. Well, that's not going to make a real dent in the deficit that you're mentioning. What, are you not interested in cutting the military budget? Okay, I was encouraged to see. I was like, wait a second, he is interested and understands the military budget probably will need to be cut in order to get the deficit under control. And then you look at military spending in general. It's like, all right, some of it, the breadth of our military spending arose during the Cold War when I think it was justified. Then it retrenched a little bit in response to that. Saw it in Southern California with the aerospace industry in the early 90s. Okay, we don't need as many, F-1s or F-15s or God knows what, and all of a sudden a lot of people get fired. But then in response to the war on terror, it skyrockets again, and then we find ourselves with a military budget 9x anybody else. And okay, wait a second, we're driving. Everybody's used to getting fat on the hog, and all these military contractors, spending $132 on a hammer from Home Depot, God knows what. And that, yes, if Trump can take a look at that and say, wait a second, you guys had to increase your military budgets to compete with us, but our military budget was a remnant of a past era anyways. We all need to simultaneously coordinate cutting it, and America can maintain its proportional advantage. But hey, we're not wasting, we're not driving ourselves into bankruptcy, and you guys don't have to spend all this money to try to compete with us. I mean, that's an absolutely worthy goal, and I hope he makes progress towards it, even if it's not 50%.
Yeah, I mean, it's a win for everybody involved. And,
absolutely.
I think just I don't know if you've heard this story yet or not, but there's so much waste, fraud, and abuse in the military. It's almost unparalleled. Like certainly with USAID, there's cutout organizations getting all kinds of money. That's just criminal, right? That isn't about waste or anything like that. That's just straight up fraud. In the Army, or in the military rather. So when you're an enlisted guy and an officer as well, but mostly applies to enlisted from my perspective, there's $460 a month taken out of your paycheck to pay for your food. It's not true that it's completely socialist, although it was pretty socialist to be in the military by design, but healthcare and stuff like that. But there's a certain amount of money allotted to you for housing and a certain amount of money allotted to you for food, and it gets taken out of your paycheck without you fucking agreeing to it, basically, right? And then they'll give you some of it back should you live off post. They'll give you a certain amount of it back. So you buy your own food because you don't go to the chow halls and shit. As it turns out, over 50% of that money isn't even going to food. So an E1 in the Army might be making a $1,600 a month paycheck before taxes, and $460 of the additional money allotted to him has been taken from him, and only $230 of it actually used for that purpose. Everything else just gets dumped back into the pool. It's like, okay, how you disagree with correcting that? Like, what are we going to do? Are we going to either feed them more? And I'm fine with that, by the way. Get the powdered eggs and the fucking muffins out of the goddamn Army. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
They're fucking professional athletes. They get paid to close with and kill the enemy. I want them on steroids. Yeah. I'm not kidding. I want them all on TRT. I want them somewhere between 800 and 1100 fucking tests, right? I want them fucking eating drinking raw milk, eating fucking red meat, eating eggs. That's what they should be doing.
Number 5 in the fucking military.
None of that bullshit. I mean, these Otis Spunkmeyer muffins that it's like, and there's some conditions where you have to eat MREs. It's all processed bullshit, but that is what it is. But just in garrison, when you're back in the country, you're eating garbage. Most of these lower enlisted dudes who don't buy their own food are just eating garbage all the time. So how does that not affect you don't want to correct these things? I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear any of this moralizing bullshit about, oh, we're not going to take money from the soldiers. Like, no, you took money from the soldiers, motherfucker.
Yeah. Well, I think it's what you're seeing with DOGE right now, is that taking something away from someone is far more painful and disruptive than not giving it to them in the first place, right? And that's why this problem hasn't been solved, and that's why the can's been kicked down the road for so long, is that if there's bloat, if you are spending a lot of money on people, whether it's direct payments for employment to personnel, or it's payments to vendors who are supplying various divisions or programs or departments with bullshit, once you turn off that faucet, it's like once someone's getting used to having their coffer filled, and all of a sudden, they have to go find the money elsewhere or go find a job elsewhere, that's what pisses the most people off. Right. And that's why it's been such a difficult problem to solve. You needed someone who was so high on the disagreeability, had such a high tolerance for conflict, and was so disagreeable. And it's kind of the perfect storm, or the perfect combination of Donald Trump and Elon Musk, because same thing on the social media side. The reason that all these big social media companies were letting the C-suite, the executive suite, was letting themselves get bullied around by lower level woke employees is because nobody wanted to cause a fuss. Nobody had a high enough tolerance and said, no, like, I think this is right. I don't care how many people are pissed off at me. And then luckily you had a guy, everyone thinks it's because he's rich. It's like, no, Elon Musk was just autistic enough to not care. Yeah. Luckily, you needed the money plus the level of autism that he could have that many people that are pissed off at him, that hate him, and he didn't care. Yeah. And that's kind of the level of callousness, for better or for worse, that you need to go ahead and solve these problems, because once people get something taken away, they get very angry about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's people are super... I don't understand the argument, to be honest. Even from their perspective, I don't understand the argument that we've already saved every taxpayer in America $700, and they're like, oh, well, no, quit it. Knock it off.
Because they're always gonna find the one outlier. One thing I saw on social media this weekend, someone was posting that a friend of theirs was like a park ranger and lost their job. And listen, there might be a few people that were good people that had jobs that probably had some value, or that were qualified, or was their dream job, and they were conducting somewhat of a public service, and they weren't getting paid $700,000 a year, and they lost their job. So really, what they'll do is they'll grab the couple mistakes, or they'll grab they'll grab the couple outlier cuts where someone was someone lost something undeservedly, and they'll use that to contaminate or tarnish the entire project. Yeah. And they'll ignore all this other bloat, all this other waste, or they'll just falsify it. I think the new transportation secretary, I forget his name, he clapped back at Buttigieg this morning on Twitter and Buttigieg saying, "Oh my God, another plane crash. We need to know who got fired from the FAA, how many air traffic controllers." And he just clapped back saying, 400 people, none of them were air traffic controllers. They were all people within their first year of employment. I'm sorry, the idea that there was any connection between these plane crashes and the people that were fired, it's just not true. Yeah. So they'll just fill in the blanks and falsify what the cuts were and connect it to some sort of unfortunate result. Or listen, there's going to be mistakes, and there's going to be cuts that maybe could have been justified to have been maintained, and they'll just use that to criticize the entire project. Yeah.
Yeah, that one was particularly dumb. His name's Sean Duffy, by the way. He was a congressman from Wisconsin, I think, before.
Seems to be on top of his stuff.
Yeah, he's a smart guy. He was, I think he was just on Fox for the last couple of years, but he was a congressman from Wisconsin before. Yeah, but the gall for Buttigieg to say anything,
unbelievable,
is like it's hard to tell. I've said this a number of times, but the Biden administration's cabinet is the most incompetent cabinet in the history of this country. And it's not even fucking close. Yeah. Between Buttigieg, Yellen, Mayorkas, and Austin, right? Just those four. It's the worst things I've ever seen. It's the most incompetence, the most cowardice. It's mind-boggling.
And it's just, I wonder why, right? I wonder why this particular era, maybe it was because the system, and this is what I harp on a lot, is that some people aren't necessarily like these evil people. They're just, or, to the extent someone, I talk about this a lot in analyzing California issues, like, all right, Karen Bass is not the worst person ever, but she's part of a decrepit system, and she's going to be, and she's always going to make a decision to maintain the system. And that's what's harmful, regardless of whether or not she's a terrible human being. Yeah. Right. And it's like, maybe, a Buttigieg's like, all right, not a dumb guy, seemed to be personable, could give a good interview, but there was no reason for him to do anything not stupid in transportation. All the systems were in place for him to keep the stupidity on the tracks.
Yeah, I mean, you could see the line of thinking from the Biden administration at putting him there in the first place.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, well, we got to have a gay dude. All right, well, nobody cares about DOT.
Yeah.
So let's put him over there. It's like, all right, well, there's consequences to that, obviously.
It's important shit that they're in charge of.
When he disappears for 3 months for paternity leave for a fucking surrogate baby.
Yeah, for a husband that was not pregnant.
Yeah, I mean, that's something new.
Yep.
That's new. Hopefully we won't do that again.
Nope.
Back to, before we get out of here, I want to talk about Israel some more, because I'm sure a lot of people, it's a very, not that this is anything new, but it's a very mind-trapped, tumultuous conversation for some people. For some reason, some folks think that because we prioritize them over their Arab neighbors, that somehow the Jews are in control of America. That seems odd to me, right?
Yeah.
That 8 million people in a country over there and 8 million here could be in charge of anything, but maybe there's certainly influence. AIPAC spends a fuckload of money.
Absolutely, but here's the thing, and this is something also where I may be a little more sympathetic to the Ukraine, even though I would love to see that war end and think Ukraine needs to make concessions. People are going to advocate for their own interests. Israel's going to advocate for its own interests. It's not Israel's fault for the counterparty to which they're advocating for to make stupid decisions. Just like I don't think we should have given 200 billion or however many billion to the Ukraine. But if I'm Zelensky, I'm going to advocate for that.
Sure, yeah.
It is the counterparty's obligation to not make a stupid decision in giving into all of that advocacy. Just like with, some people who, in my argument previously, and like was never even that much of, me, I wasn't even that much of a rah-rah Israel person. I just know after October 7th, okay, they want to kill us. They're going to have to fight back. I'm sorry. These Jewish neocons were what drove us into Iraq. Well, George Bush was the president. Dick Cheney was his vice president. Rumsfeld was his secretary of defense. Like, I don't know. If
you're talking about board members for military industrial complex companies got into government. That's what happened.
A lot of
right?
that too. But I guess what I'm saying is that I see so many situations where there's a group of people who make a decision. 60% of them are Christian. Another share of them are Jews, but because the share of Jews of this cohort is high in proportion to how many Jews there are generally, that it's the Jews' fault, that it was the Jews driving this decision. It was like, well, George W. Bush deserves some, there's some culpability. There is some personal agency of George Bush and Dick Cheney and the other not Jewish members of that administration for going to war in Iraq.
And Tony Blair, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, nobody seems to remember that guy, but he had his foot on the pedal as well.
Yeah,
a little bit,
and look, Wolfowitz and who are the other Jews who were high-ranking neocons? Like, I didn't agree with them, and I think Paul Wolfowitz should hide his head in shame. But like, I'm sorry, you can't drag all the culpability back to the 3 Jewish members of this group of people who made a shitty decision.
Yeah, I also don't think that the United States invading Iraq had any kind of tangible benefit for Israel. All it did was make that
the exact opposite.
It just destabilized a country, and now they're fucking state sponsor. Like they were state sponsors of terrorism before to some degree. They would pay Palestinian suicide bombers' families like $20,000 or something like that.
Yeah, trust me, it was better for Israel with the Shiite and Sunni rivalry between Iraq and Iran.
Yeah,
and so I see that all the time, and I'm like, it came up another time recently, in arguments on Twitter about resettling some of the Palestinians in Western Europe, and like, Israel doesn't give a fuck where they go. Israel's been trying to get the Jordanians and the Egyptians to take them in for 30 years. If Spain and Italy are stupid enough to say, no, why don't you come here? I'm sorry. That's
Ireland
not
too.
Ireland too. That's not Israel's fault.
Yeah.
If Spain is dumb enough to take in all these third world refugees, that's Spain's fucking fault.
Yeah. I think certainly Trump saying that the U.S. was going to take over Gaza was a negotiation tactic.
Sure.
But like, in no way will that ever happen.
No.
And you can see it within a week. Egypt's like, no, we got this. Relax. Like, yeah, you should have had this 30 fucking years ago. Actually, let's say 55 years ago. When you tried to fucking invade. Yeah. Instead of just taking the really good deal that could have made this all like go away, but
100%.
Certainly it's a negotiation tactic, but there is something to it, right? The something that was lost on a lot of people with the Abraham Accords, and I think it was very obvious what was happening there. Trump started picking off the richest Arab countries, right? Oh, like Bahrain, fucking UAE, Saudi Arabia, to get them involved and say, hey, we don't care about this Israel shit anymore. We need to make some money. You know what I mean? Rich countries, by and large, don't become state sponsors of terrorism. Now, we would talk about Saudi Arabia and UAE because some of their respective royal families have been involved in it over the years. But MBS is desperately trying to drag that country into modernity. He's doing everything. They're spending hundreds of billions of dollars from their sovereign wealth fund to be like, hey, we're fucking cool, man. We're not trying to fight anymore. And even to such a degree that they're shooting down ordnance from Iran going towards Israel, right? Which I didn't have that on my fucking list for things that happen.
Unlikely, yeah.
Yeah, but it's like, it became very obvious to me once the Abraham Accords leaked, and I started seeing some of the potential signatories. I'm like, oh, I see what's happening here, right? Like Kuwait's already on our side. They're one of the richest. Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, UAE. All right, cool. We can do this. You know, and this is what we should be. I'm not saying we should be directly involved necessarily in the Gaza shit, but this is what we should be pressuring Arab countries to do.
Purely as negotiators.
Yes. Turn that into a fucking resort town and pay the people that live there to fucking build it, right? Create economies where people fucking... The ideology goes away when you've got a fucking nice TV, man. I'm telling you. Like, when you've got warm food and a nice TV, ideology starts to melt away. But when you're abjectly impoverished, then it's an easy sell every time.
Yeah, and unless you also are... There's still a cancer in your society, and the cancer in the Palestinian society was like that. You see all the videos, right? Oh, we were in this open air prison, and then there's 1,000 videos of like luxury car dealerships and resorts and cafes, and oh, great, people were buying Bugattis. It was like there was wealth there. You could have, and that's why I'm in this. I've been critical of Israel over the 21st century, but like here they gave this territory to the Gazans. And literally, they did build. They had a certain aspects of a functional society, and then you just have this one strain of the society that says, "Okay, this isn't good enough. If we want all the land, and we're going to get it back, and we don't care if we have to like let you kind of destroy our society and what we've built just to make yourselves look bad, so we can win in the long run." And it's like, what the hell are you supposed to do with those people? What are you supposed to do with someone like that?
Yeah.
You know? So no, absolutely. Like what ideally would those other Arab countries or other countries in the region coming around and saying, okay, we need this to be an international domain that is built and is prosperous and doesn't have this nihilistic strain that would rather have the cafe and the car dealership blown up just to make Israel look bad.
Yeah, it's stupid.
Right.
But you can give people a choice. Stick or care. We're going to have this problem at our southern border here soon because Trump officially signed an EO today to designate a number of organizations as terrorist organizations. Tren de Aragua, MS-13, Sinaloa, Jalisco, United Cartels, Northeast Cartel, Gulf Cartel, and the Michoacan family, have all now officially been designated as terrorist organizations, which under the AUMF, the authorization for military force, we can now conduct warfare on them no matter where in the world they are, including other people's countries. Okay. Interestingly enough, I'm not saying we should, although I do think we should invade Mexico immediately. I think we should have invaded them a week into this administration. I think we push somewhere between 15 and 50 miles into that country and set up a demilitarized zone and kill anybody that comes into it, frankly. Like hundreds of thousands of Americans are dead. More Americans are dead from fentanyl than any other war than our own Civil War or World War II, right? And we're catching up. We will pass World War II this year from fentanyl overdoses. And you can apply this to Canada as well. We should shut that border down too. And we should tariff them both at 2,000% until they get their shit together. Now, I know he's trying to slow roll it right now, but again, I don't think there's time for this. I think you have to punch people right in their fucking mouth. And Mexico... Canada is incompetent, right? That's one thing, and it's bad. It's not good for us, and we can get them to be less incompetent through some force, some minor force. Mexico, 38 people had to die for that woman to become president, right?
Really?
And
wait,
yeah,
what happened there?
all of her opponents got killed.
Jesus Christ.
Yes. Journalists, opponents, there's 38 people total got killed during that election cycle. And then, oddly, some Jewish Mexican lady became president of that country. I again, don't know how that all worked out.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Strange. Socialist at the end of the day?
Yeah, basically, yeah. Old school, like, Western European socialist, right? So they are, like, captured by the cartel. The Mexican government is a cartel, and we can't deal with that. I mean, you can't allow somebody to set up a fucking criminal enterprise just to your south and think that that's going to be okay, right?
Yeah, and interesting because I saw this discussed, and you might probably might even want to respond to Jesse Kelly. Jesse Kelly was going off in that, hey, any attempt to treat this like a military operation is going to look a lot more like Vietnam than Iraq or any of those situations, because the cartels are that powerful and they're on their home turf. And he was warning everybody against it. That's too dangerous. That we can't just blow them off the map. I don't know. I imagine you're taking the opposing position there. You think that while the military risk is palpable, that we can make enough impact in at least stemming their commercial channels from getting the drugs into the country.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with him on the Vietnam thing. That's 100%. If we did a full invasion of Mexico to disrupt cartels, then that's exactly how it would go. Right now, the plan is to start sending special operators down there.
Okay.
So the Special Forces Group got authorized by the Mexican Senate to train some of their people last week, and then this week they authorized them to actually go down there and fuck people up, right? So we'll see to what degree that's useful, but I think a demilitarized zone is that's where I'm comfortable. I don't think we need to conduct total war on Mexico. We just shut down their economy. That's like you don't get to fucking participate with adults until you start acting like one. It's that simple. And we're their largest purchaser, just like we buy 80 or 76% of Canada shit too. That's why they give us a huge discount on it. It's like you don't exist without us. So this is about, at this point, it's about leadership. We are the top dog. We've been incompetent and asleep at the wheel for decades, and we're still top, right? Yeah. So what Trump is doing is just putting his dick on the table, right? It's like, hey, this is, we're not doing this anymore. And people are like, fucking this. It's like, no, we're just not doing it. So
yeah, no, it's the same thing about do you have a bias towards normalcy and kicking the can down the road, or are you going to address the problem? And Donald Trump's approach towards the problem says, all right, identify your leverage, utilize your leverage, and he's got a basic thesis that in 99, if not 100 out of 100 of these situations, the United States has its leverage, and so have leverage and don't be afraid to use it. Seems to be the philosophy.
I just don't know if the people of the United States aren't ready for what it takes to win wars, and I don't know if that's a messaging problem or if it's a comfortability problem or what it is. War is not pretty. Yeah. And I think the international stage. I won't buy into the propaganda that somebody says Israel's fighting the most restrained and humane war ever. That's fucking nonsense, right? That's stupid. Like, why even say that? Because it's such a paper tiger that all it takes is one or two examples of dipshits doing dumb shit, or even accidents, right? Yes. To disprove it. So why have you set yourself up that way? It doesn't make any sense. No, make the moral case for the war itself, and everything that follows is what 100% follows.
100% agreed.
We can't have people fucking killing a bunch of our people. Yeah. That's the way it is. And look, you can say whatever you want about us, and when I say us, I mean from their perspective, from Israel's perspective. You can say what you want about what negative shit Israel's done. Okay, cool. So let's fight about it. Yeah. And who wins. That's how it works, man. Now, Netanyahu is a piece of shit. He's not a good man, but he's probably the best person to be in charge right now because he's a wartime consigliere. He's not Tom Hagen, rather. He's whomever else. Right?
He's Sonny, and listen, the guy. It's probably not a great idea for a guy to be in charge whose brother got killed by the enemy. Yeah, because he's always going to be thinking about it emotionally. Yeah. And sure, there's a bunch of people that I'd prefer that I think probably would have been better to be in that seat over the past 20 years than it's him. Yeah. But he's done what he needed to do in this situation.
Well, to be fair, he almost went to prison because of what he was trying to do to the judiciary in Israel.
Sure.
Right. And like 2 weeks rather before October 7th, he was heading into court. You know what I mean? And it's that, like, for good reason. What he was trying to do was completely crazy and authoritarian. But had none of that happened and he wasn't prime minister at the time, probably would have put him in charge of this war after the fact. So it's a fucked up situation, because you don't want if you're getting into a fight, you don't look around for your nicest friend.
Yeah.
Like, oh, fucking Jerry's got a lot of nuance, so I'm gonna fucking have Jerry come fight with me. No, I'm looking for dudes that have fucking bruised knuckles already.
100%.
So it makes sense to that degree, but I think he's going to have to pay for some of his shit after this is all over.
Absolutely. And that's just, it goes back to the basic scorecard there. It's that, yeah, not a great guy, and yeah, engaged in nonsense on within the framework of Israeli domestic politics, but like, the people leading on the other side are complete barbarian nihilists. So if I'm looking at the scorecard, I know who the bad guy is at the end of the day, even if there's not a entirely genuine good guy. And that it's just unfortunate when there are two people living in such proximity to each other. If one side is unwilling to accept the current conditions and is insistent on continuing to like initiate violence, like, I'm sorry, it's the same thing as Japan in total war at the end of World War II. It's like either you surrender. We're not going to sit there and leave you with the Imperial Council and the Emperor. And hey, maybe in a few years you decide to go, attack Guam again. You got to lose.
Yeah. I mean, it's really important for there to be winners and losers in war.
Yeah.
If we had dominated Germany after World War I, instead of basically just calling a truce and then trying to take their nuts from them, World War II probably doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you just do total war on Germany in the late part of the fucking 19 teens, none of that shit ever happens after that. But that's what happened with that. That's with Japan. We corrected our mistake.
Correct.
That's what we should have done to Germany in World War I. Not that we had nuclear weapons or anything, but we should have.
There was less tolerance, because you even see, like, even by 5 months before Pearl Harbor, there's still like 20% support for the United States. Americans at that point, they just like, we thought that we could be on one side of the Atlantic Ocean and just exist, and be isolationist. And unfortunately, World War II was the wake up that like, hey, if you want, the development of this country into the superpower that you want it to be, unfortunately, you're gonna have to, be involved in world affairs beyond that. And now, hey, as I said before, we're in a post Cold War era where we need to recalibrate that in another direction. Yeah. And so it's kind of, constant recalibration. It
is. Yeah. We're in a, we've been in a regime change phase since the 1950s. And we're in it now, right? Yeah. Like Ukraine, we did that. 2014, we fucking engineered that bullshit, and in 2017 as well. Like everything that's going on in Ukraine is a result of our meddling to some degree.
And listen, Russiagate didn't help.
No. It's like
I get it. Putin was the aggressor, but if he's sitting there, he's like, they're making me the enemy. So okay, if they want me, if they're going to say that I'm the mortal enemy, then I guess I'll act like it.
And we need to stop. So the pivot that needs to happen now is we need to stop talking about regime change and start talking about culture change, right? That's what really matters. And when I say culture change, I mean that this is one example. It has nothing to do with the Mideast. But I've been for the last 5 or 6 years now advocating for the United States to use the Treasury, or what would become a sovereign wealth fund, hopefully, to purchase mining rights in Peru and Chile, right? And put to work Peruvians and Chileans to mine everything, and then have that material go northbound up through Central America and give those people refinement jobs so they don't have to fucking flee their country, so that there's money and support and infrastructure to stop the cartels from dominating everything all the time, and then send the refined product here for assembly. And now we have a North American hegemony of the most important thing on earth right now, which is rare earth minerals, tungsten and cobalt and lithium specifically, those three things specifically. And I'm hoping that something like that is going to come to fruition. I know that Trump wants to do domestic drilling as well for all of this stuff. They're trying to reopen tungsten mines and stuff like that, and they're trying to get into Alaska to get other rare earth minerals. I think that reestablishing and he's done it with Panama, right? Like the Panama Canal, we're going to take it back. That is going to happen. And I think part of that plan should be twofold. One, to establish America once again as the United States, rather, once again as the American hegemon, and also force France and England and Germany to take care of fucking Russia and make them like, look, you can get along, or to take care of Europe in general, but you've got to get along with Russia. This has to stop. Russia has too much shit that you need, right? So why the fuck are you playing this game?
Yeah,
I don't understand. They've got rare earth minerals and they've got a ton of LNG. They've got a ton. They produce, between Russia and Ukraine, they produce like 20% of the world's wheat or something like that. Why are you fucking around? Like, find a way to work with these people. But it only happens if we stop meddling, right? Like if there's a problem kid and you keep, or this is a better example actually. If you have two male dogs especially, and they're fucking circling each other and nipping at each other from time to time, and you keep separating them, the tension just builds. You just have to let them fight. Yeah, you just have to let them fight and get it out of their system, and a pecking order will establish itself. People will fall in line and they'll move on with their fucking lives. But the more we prop up people and meddle in these situations, the worse and worse and worse it gets.
Yeah, and it's just this decadent, bloated. Again, it's kind of the structure that was built once again during the Cold War, and we've kept it bloated. And that's the whole point with NATO, is that this existed, this made sense, this had value during a prior. With a prior balance of power and a different, set of power laws and just whole geopolitical arrangement that's no longer in place. So now people have been kind of, breathing life into that, keeping it bloated and keeping it afloat for 20, 25 years. And Trump is kind of coming along and saying, okay, we need a new paradigm. We can't operate by those rules anymore. And yeah, it's disrupting a lot of people. But I feel like after Vance's speech and, a lot of it, we was getting exactly the response he wanted. He's getting a lot of the Europeans saying, oh my God, the Americans are abandoning us. We need to take responsibility for our own security. It was like, yeah, that was the fucking point.
Yeah, dude.
It's the whole point of the speech.
Yeah, like especially like Germany should be the leader over there.
Seems
in
like
my
it.
opinion, but they did for the most of the 2000s before the collapse. They had the strongest economy. You know what I mean? They were loaning. They've got IOUs out all over town. Actually, they loaned money to pretty much every other country in Europe except for England, so far as I know. They own most of Greece. If they wanted to cash in on Greece, they could just own Greece at this point, right? Which is not saying much, because the Greeks have. They've been coasting for a long time on those fucking Stoics, man. They haven't really done much in the last 2,000 years, frankly.
Yeah, there's something like, what did it say? It was like the retirement age was like, 52 or something like that. It's like, all right, you can't just sip coffee and fucking collect checks from the government forever. No. And it was like, no, yes, we can. I was like, okay, if Germany keeps spelling you out, you can.
Good luck. The energy race in Europe is way worse than it is here, because mainland Europe doesn't have oil to drill. For the most part. Now they certainly would, but all those places are inhabited. It's too condensed, right? The populations are too condensed. That's not the case in Russia, so you need them. It's not the case in the Middle East. You need them, right? If you want to continue, like let's dispense with this fantasy that we're going to be off fossil fuels in 10 years. It's nonsense, right?
Insane.
But what Germany did, instead of recognizing that very basic truth and operating as such, it doesn't mean you have to capitulate to Russia. Russia still wants to make money selling its shit to you. You know what I mean? So use their desire to sell to you as a lever, and use just like you would in any other negotiation. It doesn't make any sense not to. And then what Germany's actual response was to shut down 5 of their 6 nuclear plants. The cleanest form of energy, by the way.
Yeah.
20 years.
Just doesn't sound clean.
No.
It's only because it sounds dangerous.
It's retarded.
Yeah.
50 years. I was going to use a different room, but 50 years worth of spent fuel rods, 50 years worth for the entire country of Germany would fit in that room in there. 50 years worth.
It's nuts.
Right? So if you want to talk about clean energy, that's it. It's the best game in town, and they fucking actively worked against their own interest for some reason. I know they didn't not know this, right? They're not, people that are involved in nuclear energy are not dumb people. Now, some of the people involved in policy are midwits, but the people that are involved in nuclear are not dumb people. Otherwise, they wouldn't be involved in that shit.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder. Like, I'm a fan of Hanlon's razor, not to imply malice where incompetence will suffice, but there is a fucking limit to my disbelief, frankly. When you shut down 80 25% of your energy production domestically, right? I don't think Russia has the money to invade Ukraine if they don't do that, because Germany, all of Europe was having to buy energy from Russia at that point.
No, it was the most upside down. I get you with Hanlon's razor, although I am, particularly after recent experiences, I'm not apt to underestimate incompetence and stupidity because the groupthink around stupid initiatives and social causes over the past. I mean, however stupid they were in the 2000s, I mean, how fucking stupid were they in the 2010s? And just the kind of conformity and epistemic closure around, willy-nilly pie in the sky environmentalism could be that powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly like erodes your ability to think rapidly.
It's nuts.
And we see all sorts of psychological studies to that effect, like and from things that touch intellect all the way to things that touch morality, right? Like the bystander effect, for example. This group thing happens, and people will sit there and watch somebody die. You know what I mean? Or in a crowd, the group dynamics of what starts a riot are very interesting in the same way. It makes people do things they wouldn't normally do.
Yeah.
And now you map that on to American, or any, it doesn't even American, doesn't matter. You map that onto politics, and you start to get these ridiculous moves that are clearly wrong, right? We're in a very tumultuous situation now, because something far worse like DOGE is doing great work. I think there's only so much they can do until people start to feel pain, consequences, right? People want iPads and Hot Pockets, and should they have them, then pretty much everything you can get away with it, right? And I don't know. I think the cartel thing might be a wake-up call for people. I think once that goes kinetic and you start seeing fucking severed heads on the side of the road and IEDs on American roads, which I believe will happen, by the way, I think people are going to wake the fuck up. The problem is, once they wake up, who's going to be the leader there, willing to take that power and do something actually good with it, and not just try to invade Iraq again?
Yeah.
That's always the problem. You know what I mean? It's like you simultaneously, this is why leaders are important. You simultaneously have to marshal the will of the people, but also control their fucking bloodthirst, because that's how it goes. After 9/11, we could have invaded anybody.
Yeah.
There was a year-long period that we could have invaded anybody for any fucking reason, and it would have happened. People may have bitched about it, like some group of people may have bitched about it, but we could have done it, and that's a problem, right? That's a big problem.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening to some degree now in the Mideast too. I think I think what happened in with Israel is quite a bit more justified than Iraq, certainly.
It's like, hey, you're telling your people, listen, we are going to, you can live your life on a day-to-day basis, despite the fact that 20 miles down the road, there are people that ideally would like to kill you. If they do come and kill a bunch of you randomly and take a bunch of you hostage, that imperils your entire, that is an existential threat to your society, because your society can't hold itself together if everyone's worried about being killed all the time. Yeah. You have one option to go and defeat the enemy on the other side there, and I get it. I understand why some people don't understand. I understand why some people domestically might not understand the totality of the situation that they're facing. I'm still shocked, and I still scratching my head why some people seem to all of a sudden be twisting themselves in pretzels to excuse the activities of like Islamic terrorist militants who, if they had the option, would take you out too. Yeah. I just don't fucking get it.
Yeah, that's a wild one. And now it's all over Europe.
Yeah.
I just don't get it, man. It's like I don't know that any of these people have ever met Muslims, because I have Muslim friends. I've fought with them, you know what I mean? In war, in actual war, not in some fucking protest somewhere pretending like Palestine's a real place. And they are deeply honorable and high cultured people, right? They care about other people. But the culture of Iran isn't something that we should be fucking picking fruit from.
No.
the culture of any Middle Eastern country, frankly, isn't something we should be picking fruit from, and that it doesn't make any sense.
It was like earlier today, someone on Twitter was like criticizing Israel. It's the only ethno state in the Middle East. It's the only one that is formed around a specific ethnicity or religion. I was like, someone responds with like, "Are you familiar with the fucking Islamic Republic of Iran?" It's like, what? They just, I don't get where everybody lost sight of what goes on.
It's kind of silly, and you can. I will be as critical of the Israeli government as anybody because, one, I hate all government. I think they're all a bunch of cunts. But
sure,
I have historical basis for it. I've actually read the goddamn Bible that all these Christians talk about all the time, and I've read Judges and Kings, and I know that the vast majority of Israeli kings over the years, at least during the biblical writing years, were considered, quote, evil in the eyes of God. They were incompetent, not evil in the way that we would say it,
sure,
right? But incompetent or stupid or philanderous or some other bullshit, right? It's like the idea that Israel is somehow immune from bad leadership, that's a really bad assumption to make, right? Because especially if you're an Israeli.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, we're immune from that shit. Like, no, you better carefully select the people that you're going to put in charge because we're in a dangerous situation right
No doubt.
now. You know what I mean?
Outnumbered 100 to 1.
Which is why they choose people by and large, most of the time. It's not always true, but most of the time the people choose a prime minister who is a little bit more aggressive. So you're going to get that, right? But if you woke up tomorrow and this is a good litmus test, and maybe it just betrays some level of xenophobia. I don't know, but if somebody said 100 Israelis are moving into your neighborhood, like, and then next week they said 100 fucking Palestinians are moving into your neighborhood, which one are you concerned about, and which one do you not care about, or how do you feel about that? I think that's a pretty decent litmus test.
It's a pretty decent one, man. Yeah. It's a pretty decent one
because Egypt won't take them, and Kuwait kicked 300,000 out. And I'm not saying that all so-called Palestinian people are bad or anything. It's like, but that culture's got to change.
Yep.
America. Christians aren't piling rocks onto women who did math anymore. That's over, right?
Correct.
Grow the fuck up. That's it. Like, I want you to be deeply faithful. There's a lot of wisdom in the Quran, right? Just like any other philosophy, there's a lot of stupid shit in there too, right? Mm-hmm. The same thing with the fucking Bible. There's a lot of stupid shit that, like, we're not fucking killing kids for being rude to their moms anymore either.
No.
You know what I mean? It's like who's grow the fuck up.
And it's like suicide bombing. I'm sorry, that is an indicator of a barbaric, backwards society. And same thing. We 5 years with no suicide bombings, and all of a sudden everyone forgets. Like, this was not ancient history. No. And I'm sorry, like, it was like 2001, these Arabs, these Palestinians were literally just walking into cafes in Tel Aviv and blowing themselves up with bombs filled with nails to go, cause as much harm to civilians as possible. The only reason it stopped is because Israel put a wall up. It's like, clearly these people a lot of people in that territory have barbaric intent. The only thing limiting them is capability. It's like, that is, at the end of the day, an assessment you have to make. If you go spin the wheel on 100 people, who's more likely, who's going to be more sympathetic to somebody who might want to walk into a fucking cafe or a German market or God knows what, stab someone or blow themselves up? It's really just no contest.
Yeah, I mean, you don't see a whole lot of Jews in Western countries attacking other people.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if I've definitely heard examples here and there.
The exceptions prove the rule. That it happens so few times that it's only a couple instances. Meanwhile, on the other side, it's just a reality. You can go find dozens upon dozens upon dozens of instances.
And I hate to have to parse it all out because it doesn't have anything to do with the race or ethnicity of the person. It has it doesn't even have anything to do with Islam versus Judaism or Christianity necessarily.
Yeah.
It's just about the application right now. Yeah. Right? Is there a strong argument to be made amongst a large group of your people that you can do crazed violence against other people just because of who they are?
Yeah.
If that's the case, then you're fucked, right? Sorry. Like even with the Crusades, people always talk about the Crusades and very rarely talk about the Muslim invasion of Europe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's like the Muslim community invaded Europe 3 separate times before the first crusade was launched. 3 times, right? It's like, all right, fucking relax, guys. But on the 3rd time, it's like, all right, we're gonna do this now.
Yeah.
It's like, just my sincere desire is that people grow the fuck up, and I think it's an issue of poverty and power vacuums, some of which we've created, but some of which are just circumstantial. And this is what we should be doing. Instead of trying to conduct regime change in any country, I don't give a fuck who the leader is. People will select their leader either through violence or through votes. But once the culture changes, you cannot unring that bell. Once people have grown tired of a certain thing, we're seeing it right now. Trump's approval rating amongst all people, not amongst just Democrats, is like 65%, right? Or amongst Republicans, rather, 65% right now. That is wildly high for somebody who is a literal Hitler. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Once culture flips like that, these propagandists lose all their steam. They lose everything, right? And that's what we should be trying to do. We should be trying to influence culture, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. It's just something that is ephemeral. It's tough, right? It takes a weird defining moment, right? It's like the Trump 2024 election, but then also, I guess one of the more notable historical moments like that was like the overthrow of Ceausescu in Romania, where just like all of a sudden, one guy gave a speech showing like, hey, I can criticize Ceausescu, and like an entire country that had been just under his boot for decades just flipped and went and killed him, and and freed itself like a heartbeat. One of those almost just defining moments where it's like, oh my God, the entire reality shifted so quickly.
Yeah. And we're going to have to do some things that are uncomfortable. We've started the process now, which is encouraging. We're going to take $600 billion from the Saudi sovereign wealth fund and invest it in American manufacturing and all sorts of other shit. But we got to do it on the other end as well. So right now there's a law in place that says that American companies can't work with Afghanistan because the Taliban is in control of it. I mean, I understand the reason for that. The Taliban is not exactly the kind of people you want to be doing business with. But that is a breeding ground for terrorism right now, more so than fuck Iran. Afghanistan they don't have the infrastructure to police anybody. Yeah. So the radicals will end up policing themselves, which is to say become more radical and gain more support through force or otherwise. They also happen to have a shit ton of liquid natural gas and rare earth minerals. So my question is this: why isn't the U.S. State Department working on a plan to, even if the United States specifically isn't involved, to help them pull that shit out of the ground and become rich? Because rich Afghans are not going to fucking suicide bomb anybody. Yeah. I'm sorry. You'll find the odd middle class person, and that's the 9/11 hijackers. They were mostly upper middle class people. They weren't poor people, right? But you're not just those are.
Well, those are that's like the Bin Laden and Castro and all the biggest radicals always end up being trust fund kids.
Yeah. That's always how that goes. But the actual foot soldier that they need to make all this stuff happen, it's fucking poor 14 to 19-year-olds. You know what I mean? So if those guys are getting a dividend from just living like Kuwait right now, I don't know if you've ever experienced Kuwait before, but a dude will drive he'll buy a Lambo, right? And drive it, never change the oil, and when it finally fucking seizes up, I'm not kidding. You can drive down the major MSR from Kuwait City out to Al Yazlim, and you'll see fucking luxury cars just left on the side of the road. Stop. They'll call a fucking
Lamborghini graveyard.
They'll call like an Uber or something or whatever they have over there and be like, hey, I need to go to the Lamborghini dealership, and they'll go buy a new one. Those people are not doing terrorism. No, they're driving cars and fucking girls. You know what I mean? And we could do that. We could help. This is the way that American leadership helps countries. It's what we did with the Marshall Plan, right? We made Europe and Japan successful so they wouldn't fuck with us anymore, and they haven't. So why are we trying to do everything opposite of that in every Middle Eastern country we deal with instead of trying to empower because we're afraid they're going to get nukes?
Yeah.
Iran could build nukes for 20 years and never be able to touch us.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's part of, that was the thesis behind USAID, right? USAID was supposed to be improving the lives of it was supposed to be good faith payments. We are doing good deeds across the world to increase good faith and good in regard and sentiment for Americans, and then it just turned into teaching them about non-binary gypsies and whatnot. Yeah, and is that it became that this program, whatever that program was supposed to be, in order to increase goodwill towards Americans through us using our material wealth to help transactionally to help other territories, it just got corrupted by by the social mores, the liberal social mores of the 21st century. So can we build something back up that is more sturdy, that accomplishes the goal, that accomplishes the ultimate goal? And is that more based? You seem to be advocating for helping a lot of these countries extract their natural resources and monetize that. That could be it.
Yeah. It's provided we're making money off of it, right?
Sure.
But that's the way it works. If you're we're going through this now, actually, but if you've got capital and other people need it, you can use that to make more capital.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which you should do. It helps both parties when you do that stuff.
Part of the deal, baby.
Yeah,
Win-win.
It has the added benefit of them not being terrorist shitheads anymore.
That would also be a positive.
You know what I mean? Like when everybody in Afghanistan has a fucking 50-inch TV screen, nobody is going to listen when some asshole's walking through the street saying, hey, we need to go fight America. They were like, hey, dude, can you keep it down? The Bachelor's on. Trying to watch the fucking Afghan Bachelor right now.
Soft power. Increase, we need to reinvigorate our soft power. It's not from doing gender studies courses in Bangladesh. It's from this.
And it's not from our government taxing us and sending the money overseas through USAID. It's through private industry, right? That this is the way that the OSS was so much better, and then it became the CIA, and they just completely lost all their fucking sense. I don't know what happened there. Well, it became an official government agency outside of the DOD. That's what happened. Anyways, we got to go do another show. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Everybody primarily on social media, Twitter and Instagram. That's MattBilinski. Also have a podcast called The Prevailing Narrative, available Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Typically every Wednesday when I'm not traveling, so I should have a episode out soon.
Sweet. Well, thanks for coming today. I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.